Hey guys, tonight we're taking a slow, sandy stroll into one of the most quietly astonishing stories history has to offer. Picture this, you're somewhere in the middle of the Sahara Desert. The sun's barely blinking behind the horizon, the dunes glow a dull gold, and a line of camels plods forward in rhythm like metronomes made of fur and long sighs. You're walking beside them, your sandals full of sand, your skin sticky with sweat, and you're starting to question your life choices. You probably won't survive this trip, unless you like salted fish, camel milk, and walking 15 miles a day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Always love seeing how far this sleepy little history caravan travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're part of a caravan snaking across the Sahara, sometime around the 13th century. The wind is dry and scratchy like a wool blanket, and each step crunches in the sand like stale cereal. You're not alone. With you are dozens, sometimes hundreds, of traders, merchants, scribes, and donkeys carrying everything from slabs of salt to copper trinkets. And, of course, camels. Always camels. They're the engines of the desert, powered by stubbornness and cactus. Your cargo is precious. You're hauling salt, giant, gleaming slabs cut from the mines of Tadeni, stacked high and tied with ropes of palm fiber. Salt, in these parts, is gold. Sometimes literally, one block of salt could be traded for its weight in gold further south. Historians still argue whether the infamous salt for gold swaps were exaggerated or just another Tuesday for traders like you. You're headed southward, toward the fabled bend of the Niger River. Rumors have floated up the caravan routes like warm air, a place where the sands grow libraries, where people trade not just goods, but ideas. You squint toward the horizon, but all you see is dust. A lot of dust. Nights on the trail are oddly cozy. You sleep under the stars, wrapped in scratchy wool blankets, the hum of the desert wind mingling with camel grunts and low fires. Meals are simple, dried dates, flatbread that could also function as a frisbee, and goat stew if you're lucky. Tea flows like gossip. You learn stories from other travelers, about cities ruled by gold-draped kings, about oases where date palms whisper secrets to anyone who listens. Sometimes, the stars seem brighter out here, as if the sky itself leans down to check on you. Other times, sandstorms blur everything until you forget which way is forward. The desert plays tricks on your sense of time. Days blur into nights, and soon the only things that matter are water, shade, and your camel's mood. Among your traveling companions is a scholar from Wallata who speaks 5 languages and carries nothing but a satchel full of parchment. He claims he's walking the entire route to reach a place where scholars debate under the trees and even the market stalls sell scrolls. You're skeptical. You've seen a lot of mirages. But still, something about the way he talks makes you wonder. You pass other caravans headed in the opposite direction. Their camels carry bales of fabric dyed with indigo, jars of gold dust sealed with wax, and bundles of papyrus wrapped in cloth. Occasionally, a falconer rides with his bird perched on his arm, or a healer mutters prayers over dried herbs. This desert is not empty, it's a highway of ancient networks and whispered possibilities. One night, while dozing off near the fire, you overhear a story told in soft tones. It's about a place where a single book can be worth more than a camel herd. Where knowledge is guarded in stone and mud. Where the dunes cradle a city so quiet, it almost disappears in daylight. The name is odd, musical, Timbuktu. You've heard of it before, but only in murmurs. Some say it started as a seasonal stop for nomads. Others claim a clever woman founded it by offering water to travelers in exchange for news. Historians still argue whether it was originally a trading outpost, a religious sanctuary, or just a glorified rest stop with decent lentils. But in every version, books come into the picture. Books wrapped in goatskin. Books full of diagrams, maps, poetry, and ink so rich it still glimmers centuries later. The stories paint Timbuktu not as a place of power or war, but of thought. A sleepy oasis where knowledge pools like cool water. You walk on, imagining what it might feel like to arrive in such a place. You imagine palm trees casting long shadows across sand-colored walls. You picture men and women with ink-stained fingers, bent over parchment in dim rooms. You imagine libraries without doors, just shelves open to the air and the smell of dust and time. A few days later, you see something on the horizon, low shapes, half buried in heat haze. Your camel grunts, unimpressed. But the scholar next to you straightens his back and starts to smile. He says one word, quiet and certain, Timbuktu. The city doesn't rise like a jewel. It melts into the desert, its walls the same color as the dunes. From a distance, it looks like a mirage trying not to be noticed. But as you approach, you see movement, traders arriving, children laughing, the flutter of fabric in the breeze. There's a rhythm here, slow but alive. You pass under a wooden gate and into narrow streets lined with mud brick buildings. The air smells of earth, ink, and roasted grains. You've arrived. And for reasons you can't quite explain, it already feels like you've been here before. The first thing you notice about Timbuktu, aside from the satisfying squish of your sandals on sun-baked dirt, is that it's quieter than you expected. Not silent, just deliberate. The kind of hush that settles over places where everyone already knows what they're doing and doesn't need to shout about it. You wander slowly through its winding lanes. The buildings lean into each other like old friends, made of bonko, sun-dried mud mixed with straw, shaped by hand and reinforced with wood beams called torans that jut out like ribs. Their dusty surfaces look almost soft in the afternoon light. These walls absorb heat by day and exhale it gently at night. It's like the entire city is breathing. You duck to avoid a low wooden arch and find yourself in a small square. A market is unfolding, though not like any market you've seen. Instead of loud bargaining and clanging pans, this one murmurs. Fabric merchants unroll bolts of indigo-dyed cotton, their colors somehow even more vivid against the muted earth. Spice sellers gesture lazily over shallow baskets of cardamom and dried ginger. Dates, of course, are everywhere. You're handed one by a grinning boy no older than 7, who then disappears into the crowd without a word. Timbuktu welcomes you quietly. But this city wasn't always here, not like this, anyway. Back in the 11th or 12th century, it was little more than a seasonal watering hole. Tuareg nomads, led by a woman named Buktu, or possibly Buktu, depending on who's telling it, are said to have set up camp here. She may have managed the well or guarded the site. And over time, the camp gained her name, Timbuktu, which loosely means the place of Buktu. Historians still argue whether she was a real person or just a poetic mascot for the town's founding. But you like the idea of an ancient oasis named after a woman with a good eye for real estate. That early Timbuktu wasn't a city. It was more of a useful accident. It sat near the Niger River's Great Bend, close enough for access, but far enough to avoid the annual floods. Traders moving between West Africa and North Africa found it convenient. Salt from the desert met gold from the southern forests here, and the meeting point stuck. At first, it was tents. Then a few mud homes. Then a mosque. Then a second one, built just slightly taller, because apparently even in a quiet town, someone has to win the Who's Holier contest. Over time, the temporary became permanent. You're told that some of the buildings here have been standing since the 1200s, gently patched with fresh mud each rainy season like old books repaired with new bindings. You pause near a well, the original one, they say. Local kids splash around its edges. An elderly man, robes dusted with fine sand, lowers a rope carefully into the deep, dark shaft. He hums while he waits. The bucket returns full and cold. You're offered a sip. It tastes of earth and minerals and patience. Timbuktu is not just old, it's layered. Beneath your feet, archaeologists have uncovered shards of pottery, ash pits, and the charred remains of cooking fires from centuries past. People have been eating lentils, debating the stars, and trying to avoid sunburn here for generations. Even now, you can see goats nibbling at the edges of the alleyways, and hear the slap of laundry against stone. You stroll past what used to be a caravanserai, a resting spot for merchants. It's now a residence, but the wooden beams still hint at its older purpose. In the corners, faded inscriptions peek through flaking plaster, prayers in Arabic script, geometric designs, and what may or may not be an enthusiastic camel doodle. One home has a courtyard garden tucked behind high walls. You peek through a gap in the door and spot neem trees, clay water pots, and a young woman reciting verses from memory to an elderly aunt. Learning isn't just formal here. It weaves itself into meals, songs, and gossip. A boy scampers by with a bundle of parchment under one arm and a roasted yam in the other. He's likely headed to a scholar's home, one of the dozens scattered throughout the city, where teachers hold informal classes. They gather students in sheeted courtyards or under covered porches. There are no printed syllabi, no chalkboards. Only memory, call and response, and the soft rustle of pages. Scholars here are called ulama, and they're the real celebrities of Timbuktu. Not warriors. Not kings. But people who can quote 10 lines of poetry while fixing their tea. People who know which moon phase is best for planting onions. People who can tell you, confidently, the exact year the river Niger froze over, whether or not it ever actually did. You hear of one scholar, Ahmed Baba, whose personal library once held over 1,600 books. When he was exiled by the Moroccans in the 16th century, he reportedly grieved not for his freedom, but for his lost manuscripts. That's the kind of town you're in. As evening settles in, the city grows cooler. Shadows stretch long across the walls. Lamps flicker to life in doorways. From somewhere nearby, you hear the tapping of a scribe preparing ink, soot and tree gum, ground together by hand, stored in tiny leather cases. You find a quiet corner near a well-worn bench, half buried in sand. You sit. You breathe. You realize Timbuktu isn't flashy. It's not trying to impress. It doesn't need to. It simply is, a place where words matter more than walls, and silence isn't emptiness but invitation. You close your eyes for a moment. Somewhere nearby, a baby starts crying, then immediately stops. Someone laughs softly. A bell rings twice. You wonder if tomorrow you'll find the mosque, or maybe a hidden bookshop. But for tonight, you're content to sit with the city, to let it reveal itself in slow, careful layers. Morning in Timbuktu begins with a whisper. Not the shriek of alarms or bustling horns, but the soft scrape of brooms against earthen courtyards, the low chant of morning prayers, and the rhythmic shuffle of sandals on packed sand. The air is cooler now, a brief and gentle reprieve before the sun stretches its arms over the Sahara once again. You're up early too, drifting toward the center of the city with no real plan, just your feet and your curiosity. A rooster crows half-heartedly somewhere nearby. A woman with a basket balanced perfectly on her head passes by, nods, and continues on her way without breaking stride. You nod back, less gracefully. There's a sort of calm confidence to everyone you meet here. No one's in a hurry, but somehow everything gets done. Your first stop is Sankor. You've heard it mentioned in hushed tones, part mosque, part school, part intellectual lighthouse in a sea of sand. Its minaret rises like a patient finger, pointing quietly toward the heavens. The building itself isn't grand by European standards, no gold leaf, no soaring vaults, but it radiates purpose. The kind of structure that seems to say, what happens in here matters. Come in, if you're serious. Inside, the mosque is cool and dim. Sunlight filters through high slits, painting the floor in thin golden bars. There's a slight scent of dust and ink, and the hushed murmur of voices reciting lines under their breath. Students sit on woven mats, hunched over parchment, rocking slightly as they memorize verses. Their tutors glide among them like shadows, correcting gently, offering new pages, dipping reeds into small pots of ink. This isn't just spiritual study. These students are learning everything from theology to law, astronomy, grammar, and, yes, even mathematics, though the equations look more poetic than numeric when written in flowing Arabic script. One boy proudly shows off a page where he's copied a section on inheritance law. You nod as if you understand. You do not. But the lines are beautifully inked. Historians still argue whether Sankor and its fellow institutions qualify as a university in the modern sense. After all, there were no degrees, no formal graduation ceremonies, and no campus bookstore hawking overpriced robes. But in terms of scholarly output and intellectual prestige, there's no denying that Timbuktu was the Oxford of the sand dunes. You find a quiet corner and observe. A girl no older than 12 is reciting a passage about planetary movements. Her tutor corrects her pronunciation softly, and they repeat it together, line by line. The girl beams when she finally gets it right. Her slate is filled with chalk markings, delicate, temporary signs of knowledge in progress. Timbuktu's libraries aren't centralized. There's no grand hall with towering shelves and rolling ladders. Instead, the city's knowledge is scattered like seeds, tucked inside family homes, stored in mud brick closets, or buried in ceramic jars beneath the floor. You're told there are thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, of manuscripts, covering everything from theology to medicine, folklore, agriculture, and even local history. You follow your nose to one such home, discreet, unassuming, with a small wooden door and an old man seated outside drinking tea. He nods as you approach, gestures toward the interior. You duck through the doorway and enter a single, low-ceilinged room lined with shelves. Books, real ones, are everywhere. Stacked in bundles, rolled in cloth, tied with twine, even stuffed into clay jars like particularly valuable pickles. He shows you one. The leather cover creaks as it opens, revealing faded ink in precise, looping calligraphy. It's a treatise on medicinal herbs written sometime in the 1500s. There's a diagram of a human figure, crudely drawn but earnest, surrounded by notes on which roots to chew if your liver starts sulking, or what to do if your dreams involve too many scorpions. Practical stuff. A little later, you leaf through a collection of poetry, love verses from a scholar clearly trying to impress someone very literate. You find an essay debating whether wind has a moral character. You find a copy of Ibn Khaldun's writings on historical cycles, annotated in the margins by generations of readers, their handwriting overlapping like fossilized conversations. The scribe chuckles when you ask if any of these books are for sale. For you, he says, raising an eyebrow. maybe a copy. Then he hands you a small parchment wrapped in cloth. On it, a short proverb: the ink of a scholar is more sacred than the blood of a martyr. You tuck it into your satchel, unsure whether it's a gift or a test. You learn that book production here is a family affair. Parchment is made from cured animal skins or imported paper. Ink is handmade from soot and tree sap. Covers are stitched from goatskin, dyed with natural pigments. Whole families work together to copy texts, one person reading aloud, others transcribing, still others decorating the margins with tiny floral designs or geometric borders. No printing press here. Each copy is a meditation. You wonder how long it takes to finish a book. 1 year? 2? More? And what happens if you sneeze on page 94? Walking back into the sun, you find yourself reflecting on just how odd and wonderful it is that this city, half swallowed by desert, became a capital of books. Timbuktu didn't conquer its way to greatness. It studied, copied, translated, preserved. It didn't shout, it wrote. That evening, you sit near the mosque again, sipping a slightly smoky tea brewed over charcoal. Around you, the city hums gently. Children play in the dust, a goat bleats from a rooftop, yes, a rooftop, and a muezzin calls out the evening prayer. The words echo softly through the alleys, bouncing off walls that have heard 1,000 years of questions and still haven't run out of answers. You lie back, your head against a folded robe, the stars just beginning to show themselves. And you realize that in a city where books are treated like treasure, even the quietest mind can feel rich. You wake to birdsong and a breeze that feels almost smug with how pleasant it is. The dust from yesterday has settled, the city still smells faintly of cardamom and warmed clay, and someone nearby is pounding millet with a rhythm you swear could lull a horse to sleep. Today, your wanderings take you to the people behind the knowledge, the scholars, scribes, and teachers who kept Timbuktu's bookish heart beating. They don't live in ivory towers. In fact, some don't even have doors that lock. You meet one scholar who teaches 4 boys in the corner of his courtyard while chickens strut past his ink-stained feet. Another, a woman named Fatima, yes, women taught too, leads a group of older students in a shaded alley where vines grow thick against the walls. She's reciting an Arabic poem about the moon's phases and somehow makes even lunar eclipses sound cozy. Most of these teachers aren't paid in coin. They're supported by their communities with gifts of food, fabric, or sometimes just a grateful nod. Learning in Timbuktu is seen as a public good, not a competitive sport. And while yes, there are some show-off scholars with particularly long turbans and even longer book lists, most are humble, approachable, and, let's be honest, probably a bit sleep-deprived. You peek into a scribe's workshop, little more than a shaded porch with a mat, an inkpot, and a low table. The man seated there is carefully copying a treatise on rainfall patterns in the Sahel. His fingers are stained black, and every few minutes he stops to blow gently on the parchment. You're warned not to speak too loudly, he's in the don't mess up a vowel phase of transcription. You nod, mouth zipped. What's most striking is the sheer diversity of texts being copied. Sure, there's plenty of religious writing, interpretations of the Quran, legal rulings, philosophical rants about proper behavior, but there's also a growing trove of science, medicine, and astronomy. One student lets you flip through a diagram showing how eclipses work. It's not 100% correct by today's standards. There's a curious mention of sky ropes, but the attempt is earnest, and frankly, sky ropes has a poetic ring to it. There's a buzz in the air. Apparently, a visiting scholar from Wallata is in town, and he's going to give a public lecture later that afternoon. Word spreads fast, with the kind of subtle energy usually reserved for the arrival of a new spice shipment or the discovery of a goat that's figured out how to climb trees. As you walk, someone taps your shoulder. A teenaged boy, balancing a scroll under one arm, asks if you're going to the lecture. He grins and offers to walk you there. His name is Musa, and he's been studying law for the past 2 years. He tells you he's particularly interested in inheritance law because it causes the most family drama. You ask if he plans to become a judge. He shrugs. Maybe. Or maybe a poet. Same job, less yelling. The lecture takes place in a shaded courtyard behind the Jingareber Mosque. People file in quietly, seating themselves on mats, benches, or just folding their robes into makeshift cushions. The visiting scholar is an older man with a beard like a paintbrush and the kind of voice that makes even a discussion of camel tax tariffs sound lyrical. He speaks about the movement of stars and how their patterns might affect crop yields. Historians still argue whether astronomy in Timbuktu was purely observational or mixed with folk belief, but today, no one seems too concerned about distinctions. Musa scribbles notes onto a scrap of paper. Nearby, a woman with 3 children listens while braiding her daughter's hair. A man selling dates passes a basket around. The air smells like leather and sunshine. You learn that debate is a huge part of learning here. After the talk, students stay behind to argue politely with the speaker. They quote earlier scholars, cite obscure footnotes, and toss around dates like historical popcorn. The scholar nods, corrects them gently when needed, and occasionally throws in a riddle. Apparently, that's a thing. Teaching by riddle. You're absolutely stealing that idea. Later, back at a tea house, you meet another student who's compiling a family medical manuscript. He shows you a few entries, cures for everything from indigestion to nightmares. One involves crushed fenugreek boiled with goat milk and whispered prayers. Another suggests burying a lizard's tail under your bed to ward off fevers. You're not sure if it works, but you admire the creativity. And let's be honest, some modern treatments are only marginally less weird. The conversation shifts to ancient texts being copied from Greek or Arabic into local languages. Timbuktu wasn't just consuming knowledge, it was translating and adapting it. Historians still debate whether some of the texts preserved here are original works or fragments from Alexandria or Andalusia. What's clear is that scholars here weren't just copying, they were participating in a global conversation. Slowly. Carefully. By hand. Evening approaches again. The sun dips low and turns everything gold. You sit on a rooftop with Musa, sipping from chipped cups. He tells you about a proverb his teacher once said, "A single book can weigh more than a caravan of salt." You both laugh, mostly because you've actually seen how heavy salt blocks are. He asks what books you have where you come from. You try to explain digital libraries, instant access, and audiobooks. He squints. So, your books talk to you? You nod. Mine talk back, he says, tapping his chest, then the scroll at his side. A call to prayer echoes out again, this time from 2 different mosques in slightly different keys. It creates a gentle dissonance that somehow makes the sky look even bigger. You lie back, watching the stars emerge one by one. Somewhere below, another scribe lights a lamp and dips his pen in ink. You imagine his first stroke, careful, deliberate, the opening word of a page that might outlive even the memory of this very night. The next morning, a soft knock at the door wakes you. A boy, no more than 8, is standing there, holding a small clay jug and a folded note. For the guest who asks too many questions, he says, grinning wide enough to reveal a missing front tooth. You thank him with a few coins and unfold the note. It's an invitation. Someone named Ahmad Baba wants to meet you. Now, if this were modern times, you'd probably Google him on your phone, maybe check his Wikipedia page on the walkover. But here, you have to rely on whispers, stories, and the occasional gossipy tea seller. Apparently, Ahmad Baba is one of the most respected scholars Timbuktu has ever produced. Some say he's memorized the entire Quran, others claim he owns a personal library of over 1,600 books, an absolutely absurd number for the 16th century. Either way, you're intrigued. His home is modest but well kept, with clay walls and thick wooden beams that creak just enough to give the place character. A young man greets you, then ushers you through a shaded hallway that opens into a small courtyard lined with shelves. Books again, of course. But these are finely bound, some wrapped in protective cloth, others stacked neatly in wooden cases. You swear one of them smells like cinnamon. Ahmad Baba enters without ceremony, his robes flowing like pages in the wind. He's older than you expected, with eyes that could probably read your mind if he wanted to. He doesn't. But he does ask you a question immediately. What's the purpose of a book no one reads? You stammer something about preservation. He nods, then waves for you to sit. What follows isn't quite an interview and not quite a lesson, it's a meandering conversation over strong tea and a breeze that slips through the courtyard. He tells you about his life, born in 1556, studied under the best scholars in the region, wrote over 40 works ranging from legal theory to theology to biographical dictionaries of other scholars. He speaks quickly but softly, weaving in jokes and side notes as though he's narrating his own bedtime story. You can't help but notice how often he talks about justice, what it means, who decides it, and how books can help or hurt that cause. At one point, he pulls out a manuscript he wrote while exiled in Morocco after being accused of encouraging rebellion. This, he says, tapping the cover, is how you argue with kings without losing your head. Historians still debate how politically involved Ahmad Baba really was. Some describe him as a quiet intellectual, others as a veiled activist. Either way, his writings hint at a man who believed deeply in law, fairness, and the idea that knowledge should serve the people, not just their rulers. You ask him about Timbuktu's decline, why the libraries are being hidden, why some scholars have stopped teaching. He sighs, sips his tea, and shrugs. Empires shift, he says. Kings get nervous. Books get burned or buried. But ideas? They're like seeds. Wait long enough, and they grow back. Before you leave, he hands you a small scroll. Copy this, he says. Not with ink, with memory. It's a short poem. The desert keeps what the wind forgets. Words buried bloom when the silence sets. A scholar sleeps, but thought does not. One mind fades. 1,000 are caught. You thank him, tuck the scroll into your sash, and step back into the sunlight. The city seems slower today, as if it's listening. Walking through the alleys, you notice more locked doors than yesterday. Whispers of raids and book confiscations drift through conversations like smoke. Timbuktu's golden age may be dimming, but it's not extinguished. Not yet. Later that afternoon, you sit in a shaded courtyard with a group of younger students, teenagers mostly, though a few look older. They're reviewing notes, copying from each other, and joking about which scholar has the most confusing handwriting. One mentions Ahmad Baba and gets shushed immediately. You never know who's listening, someone mutters. You learn that many families are hiding their books. Spanish soldiers and Moroccan officials, sent by rulers who neither read nor respect the texts, are confiscating manuscripts. Some are burned. Others vanish. So, people hide them in walls, in pots, under floors, even sewn into pillows. Historians still argue about how many manuscripts survived, but recent discoveries suggest the numbers are vast, tens of thousands, maybe more. One student pulls out a page from her satchel. It's a fragment of a longer text, just a few lines about lunar calendars and planting seasons, but it's clearly been handled with care. The ink is faded, the edges frayed. She runs her fingers along the margin. "It was my grandfather's," she says. "He said it told him when to plant millet. I use it to remind myself when to study." You ask if she ever thought about copying it. She shakes her head. If they find a copy, they'll look for more. Evening again. You're beginning to see how the city changes at dusk, how the light flattens shadows, how the air fills with quiet clinks of metal pans and whispered recitations. There's a beauty in the routine, in the way books and memory are passed like recipes, carefully, quietly, without much ceremony. You think back to Ahmad Baba's question, "What's the point of a book no one reads?" And you realize the answer isn't just in reading. It's in remembering. That night, you dream of libraries buried like seeds, waiting for rain. You rise to the sound of camel bells and the faint hiss of morning fires. Today, your feet follow the rhythm of the trade caravans, those great dusty processions that stitched Timbuktu into the very fabric of the Sahara and the wider world. The city wasn't just a hub of scholarship, it was a marketplace of movement, where ideas rode alongside salt, gold, and the occasional overripe melon. You find yourself standing at the edge of the caravanserai, where traders and camels shuffle like a slow-moving river. The animals grunt and sway, draped in colorful saddlebags that squeak with every step. One camel turns its head and glares at you like you owe it money. Fair enough. You probably do. A grizzled trader named Bakery invites you to share tea. He's got the kind of voice that sounds like it's been sandpapered by decades of desert wind. Over tiny sips of the world's strongest mint tea, he tells you stories of the route from to Gaza, where salt is hacked from dry earth like crystal coffins, and how that salt is more valuable than gold to people in the interior. You nod along, trying not to look surprised when he says some caravans are over 1,000 camels long. 1,000. That's not a caravan, that's a camel conga line. We travel at night, he explains, so the sun doesn't roast our brains. He chuckles. Though it still roasts our behinds. Timbuktu was the midpoint for many of these traders, and the city profited from their dusty footprints. Markets sprang up near the caravan gates, selling leather goods, dried fish, prayer beads, and scrolls copied just days earlier by a bleary-eyed scribe. The result? A mashup of worlds, Mande blacksmiths rubbing elbows with Tuareg herders, Berber spice dealers joking with Songhai gold traders, and scholars from Cairo haggling for local dates like everyone else. But more than goods, they brought stories. A trader from Fez might carry a recent ruling from a religious court, a Hausa merchant could arrive with news of a distant battle. These tales, half fact and half performance, wove themselves into the rhythm of the city. You begin to realize, knowledge here doesn't just live in books, it walks, eats, and occasionally rides a camel. Historians still argue whether Timbuktu's fame was more commercial or intellectual. Did people come here to get rich or get wise? But on the sand-worn faces of these traders, you see no such distinction. For them, gold and gossip are equally valuable, both worth carrying across a desert if packed right. You join a group preparing for the next leg of their journey to Jen, another legendary hub downriver. One man shows you a ledger, not written in ink, but scratched into treated goat leather with a bone stylus. It's a running list of owed goods, settled debts, and prayer requests. Sometimes, he tells you, Allah forgives faster than customers. Back in town, you find yourself at the salt market. It's exactly what it sounds like, piles of rectangular salt slabs stacked like sleepy tombstones. A boy chips away at one with a metal tool, selling smaller flakes to women who use it for cooking and preserving fish. You taste a sliver, it's aggressively salty, as if daring your mouth to forget water. Merchants shout prices in 4 different languages. Someone's goat has escaped and is eating the corner of someone else's turban. Chaos, but polite. You duck into a quiet corner near the mosque, where a trio of elders sip from a communal bowl of tamarind juice. They invite you to join them. This is Timbuktu, after all. The eldest, with a beard that could host a small family of birds, tells you how the city used to tax every caravan that passed through, taking a cut of salt, cloth, or gold. A fair price for peace and water, he says. And indeed, the city provided both. Guards to protect merchants, wells to refill flasks, and enough bureaucracy to give even the most stubborn caravan leader a headache. Records were kept, receipts written on parchment or sometimes wood, carefully logged and stored in dusty chambers. You peek at one such receipt later, tucked in a shelf near the archives. It lists a payment in 2 goats, 1 rug, and half a poem. No one seems to know what happened to the poem. But not all was fair weather in camel caravans. Occasionally, storms rolled in, not the sand kind, but political ones. Rivalries between empires, shifting alliances, and the ever-lurking presence of invaders. Sometimes, a caravan would arrive missing a few camels, or a few people. Sometimes, the salt blocks would carry more than flavor. Still, trade endured. It always does. That evening, as the city cools and traders settle their accounts, you join a group around a fire. They tell you of the stars they follow, the same ones ancient navigators used long before GPS was a twinkle in the digital eye. One man traces Orion's belt with a stick, explaining how it lines up with a dry riverbed when viewed from Tagaza. The desert, he says, has no signs. Only stories. The flames crackle. Someone plays a soft rhythm on a drum made from goat skin and hollowed wood. Another trader sings a low song about a camel who fell in love with the moon. No one interrupts. You close your eyes and let the sounds of trade and tale wash over you. By the time the fire burns low, you understand, Timbuktu didn't just sit at the center of the world, it listened to it, absorbed it, and added its own stories to the caravan winds. Morning again, and you wake to a scent that's not camel or dust for once, it's ink. Rich, earthy, and slightly metallic, like whetstone and roasted almonds. You follow your nose to a narrow alley just off the main market square, where it leads you to a humble workshop with flung-open shutters. Inside, rows of scribes sit hunched over wooden boards, quills dancing across parchment in a soft, scratchy chorus. This is one of Timbuktu's famed copyist guilds, a manuscript factory of sorts, except there's no printing press here, only calloused fingers and excellent posture. You step inside, greeted with the customary head nod and tea offer. A teenage apprentice waves you toward a stool. He doesn't speak much, but his hands are already stained with indigo, ink, and, judging by the smell, a bit of lunch. Here, books are not just read. They are born. And you, lucky sleeper, have stumbled into their delivery room. You watch as a senior scribe painstakingly traces Arabic script along the edge of a page, his fingers steady despite what must be decades of practice. The tools are simple, a reed pen, a blotting stone, and small bowls of ink made from soot, gum arabic, and the occasional powdered mineral. The parchment, usually gazelle hide or imported paper, is carefully prepped, softened, and smoothed. No loose hairs, no creases. A single blotch can ruin hours of work. The pages are laid out in quires, bundles of 4 to 8 leaves, then sewn together and wrapped in leather covers that range from modest brown to wow, that's some serious peacock flair. You're handed a page to hold. It's warm from the sun and soft as an old glove. The lines aren't just words, they're art. The script flows in gentle waves, sometimes shrinking to fit footnotes or commentaries that snake around the edges like intellectual doodles. In the margin, someone has drawn a little cat. You don't know if that was sanctioned or just the work of a bored apprentice, but it makes you smile either way. Historians still argue about just how many manuscripts Timbuktu once housed. Estimates range from 100,000 to over 700,000. But regardless of the number, what's clear is this: the city wasn't just a consumer of knowledge, it was a producer. Books were copied, translated, illuminated, and debated here. This was no passive archive. This was a living, humming knowledge machine. A passing scribe shows you his latest project, a treatise on Islamic inheritance law, written in a local dialect using Arabic script. For village judges, he says, even goats deserve a fair will. He chuckles, then adds that he's working on a commentary too, because the original author was brilliant but, let's be honest, terrible at explaining things. You spend the day moving between scribe benches like a nosy hummingbird, listening to arguments over punctuation, observing a quiet rivalry between two calligraphers, he curves his aleph like a tired noodle, and watching an elder painstakingly correct a single letter using a knife so sharp it hums when it moves. These aren't just people with good handwriting, they're engineers of text, mechanics of meaning. You ask about mistakes. Everyone laughs. There are always mistakes. So, they include colophons, notes at the end of the manuscript, often in poetic form, that explain who copied it, when, where, and sometimes what they were feeling. One scribe recites his favorite, finished this on the 5th day of fasting. Ink dried too fast. May Allah forgive the smudges. As the sun lowers, a delivery boy arrives carrying a bundle of cloth-bound texts. They're destined for a scholar across town, but the boy pauses to chat. You ask how long a book lasts in Timbuktu. He shrugs. Depends. A prayer book, forever. A weather calendar, until the next flood. A love poem, until it works. You catch a glimpse of a rare text, a medical manuscript full of diagrams. It includes everything from herbal treatments for snakebite to instructions for how to diagnose melancholy by pulse. There's even a marginal note recommending crocodile dung as a sunscreen. You decide to stick with a hat. The walls of the workshop are lined with bookshelves, each labeled not by author or title, but by topic: dream interpretation, star positions, trade agreements, funerary protocols, and your favorite, poems to recite while stuck in a sandstorm. You flip one open and find the first line, "Oh sand, be merciful and leave my lunch intact." There's a joke here, made by a tired scribe about sand and brains, but you're too tired yourself to laugh out loud. The rhythmic scratching of pens is almost hypnotic. You understand now why so many of these manuscripts were so beautifully made. It wasn't just about utility. It was devotion. Every word was a thread in a fabric stretched across centuries. Night falls. The workshop lights candles and incense. A scribe reads aloud to catch errors, and you listen, not understanding the language but catching the melody. Arabic recited like a lullaby, its vowels long and sonorous, the words floating through the air like feathers from a book's wings. You think of all the hands that have touched these pages: scribes, readers, collectors, smugglers, students, dreamers. People who believed that writing something down made it matter. People who spent their lives copying someone else's thoughts, not because they lacked their own, but because they believed some thoughts were too good to vanish. You feel the tug of sleep. Even the cat in the margin seems to be yawning. You wake to the low murmur of voices, soothing, rhythmic, like water in a clay jug being gently poured from one vessel into another. The madrasa courtyard is coming alive, and today, you're sitting in on a lesson. But not just any lesson, this is Sankor, one of the most celebrated learning centers in all of Timbuktu. Possibly the entire Islamic world. You're in the middle of a university where books outnumber beds, and debates last longer than meals. The teacher, or mulim, is seated cross-legged on a mat. His students form a circle around him, some scribbling on wooden slates, others simply nodding, committing every syllable to memory. You're welcomed with a warm nod and an extra cushion. Someone hands you a cup of watery millet porridge. Breakfast and wisdom often arrive together here. Today's topic, the classification of stars, and their significance in both religious calendars and navigation. You don't expect to understand much, and you're not wrong. The lesson begins with a quote from the Quran, then segues into Aristotelian cosmology, and somehow ends up debating whether a certain comet seen last spring was a harbinger of rainfall or simply bad poetry in the sky. A student raises his hand, very formal, very polite, and challenges the interpretation. This sparks a ripple of friendly argument that lasts nearly 20 minutes. Not yelling, not ego, just minds enjoying the stretch. The teacher smiles. If knowledge is a lantern, he says, then questions are the oil. You glance around. Most of these students are young men, yes, but not all. A few women sit behind a carved screen, following along, occasionally slipping questions to the teacher via a folded note. Women weren't excluded from learning in Timbuktu, especially within wealthy or scholarly families. It's not exactly gender equity as you define it now, but it's more open than you expected. Historians still argue whether the madrasas of Timbuktu operated more like religious schools or universities in the modern sense. But as you sit here, watching a student fiercely defend a footnote about planetary motion, it's clear that intellectual rigor wasn't just encouraged, it was required. The classes here cover much more than religion. Law, medicine, astronomy, logic, grammar, even finance. You learn that one course is simply titled Contract Clauses that will definitely bite you later. Another is the 99 Names of God, and how not to confuse them in business deals. Between sessions, students gather under the acacia trees in the courtyard, rereading their notes and continuing debates that clearly began days ago. One boy is trying to memorize an entire chapter of a legal text by pacing in circles and muttering like he's negotiating with invisible jinn. Another is copying a passage for the third time because his ink smeared slightly. Perfectionism here is not a neurosis, it's a lifestyle. You get chatting with a second-year student, who proudly informs you he's studying 3 disciplines, fiqh, Islamic law, herbal medicine, and poetry. I want to heal bodies, resolve disputes, and write about both, he grins. You ask which is the hardest. Poetry, he says instantly. Law is logical. Plants usually cooperate. But rhyming anything with intestine is impossible. He offers to show you the dorms, which are modest. Very modest. Think mud brick walls, straw mats, and the occasional motivational quote scratched into the plaster. One reads, "He who snores through lectures shall awaken ignorant." Another, "Borrowed books never return. Neither do borrowed camels." And yet, the scholars here are treated with great respect. If you master a certain number of texts, and your teachers approve, you might be granted the title of faqih or even sheikh, and have students of your own. These ranks aren't handed out lightly. You can't just vibe your way into becoming a scholar here. There's no pass/fail, only you copied that footnote incorrectly and must now restart. You return to the courtyard as a visiting scholar from Cairo begins a guest lecture. He's old, impeccably dressed, and extremely opinionated about Persian commentaries on Aristotle. Within minutes, the courtyard is filled with rustling slates and furrowed brows. The man doesn't just lecture, he performs. He paces, he pauses for effect, he even throws in the occasional joke that makes his students groan with the affection reserved for a dad who just won't stop. And then he drops a surprising tidbit: Timbuktu's scholars often wrote letters to their peers in Cairo, Mecca, Fez, and beyond. Correspondence wasn't just personal, it was academic currency. Ideas traveled on camelback, folded in sheepskin and sealed with wax. One question, he says, might take 3 months to be answered. And still, it was faster than most bureaucracies. As the sun dips low, casting golden shadows across the adobe walls, students begin to drift toward the mosque for evening prayer. You sit quietly, watching as they file out, books under arms, sandals flapping, minds probably still chewing on metaphysical questions about the purpose of moonlight or whether cats possess moral agency. One boy lingers behind, staring at a line of text he's written over and over on his slate. You peek. It reads, "Knowledge is the camel that never stumbles." He repeats it softly, as though hoping the words will sink deeper into his bones. By now, the courtyard is nearly empty. Only the whisper of wind through the date palms and the creak of ancient shutters remain. The teacher, now alone, rolls up a prayer mat and smiles when he sees you still sitting there. "You stayed awake," he says. "That's rare." You smile back. Barely. You find yourself wandering through the winding streets of Timbuktu as twilight deepens, the city's familiar sandy hues now softened by shadows and flickering oil lamps. The market, which bustled with merchants and scholars earlier, is quieter now, but the air still carries a faint hum of life, and you catch the occasional laugh or the soft clink of metal. Your feet take you toward a less trodden part of town, the quarter where the book traders and manuscript collectors live. This neighborhood is a patchwork of modest homes, each with a small library tucked behind a locked door, a treasure trove of knowledge guarded carefully. Here, books are currency, status, and history all at once. A middle-aged man greets you with a nod. He's one of the city's most respected book dealers, known for his impeccable memory of who owns what manuscript and a somewhat obsessive fascination with seals and bindings. He invites you inside, where shelves sag under the weight of leather-bound tomes, some faded to the color of desert sand, others still vibrant with gold leaf and ink so black it seems to absorb the dim candlelight. You run your fingers gently over a manuscript titled "The Secrets of the Nile Crocodile," a curious blend of natural history and myth. Apparently, crocodiles were believed not only to be river guardians but also to possess knowledge of hidden treasures beneath the water. The book includes hand-drawn illustrations that look surprisingly detailed for their age, as if the artist had spent hours observing the creatures up close. Your host explains that book trading in Timbuktu isn't just about commerce, it's about preserving a legacy. Manuscripts are passed from family to family, sometimes for generations, and each owner adds notes, corrections, or even poems in the margins. These marginalia create a layered conversation across time, a dialogue between scholars separated by decades or centuries. There's a lively debate among historians about how much of Timbuktu's literary wealth was originally produced locally versus imported from other Islamic centers. Your dealer insists it was a vibrant mix. Our scholars were readers and writers, yes, he says, but also collectors. Some books came from Baghdad or Andalusia, but we made them our own. You're shown a peculiar manuscript with a woven silk cover, rumored to have once belonged to a Tuareg queen. The text is a mix of poetry and law, and there's a peculiar charm in the way the script curves like desert dunes. You run your finger along the silk and feel the faintest ripple of texture, something like the desert breeze. As you explore, your host pulls out a sealed letter, addressed to a scholar in Timbuktu but sent from distant Morocco. It's an example of a wide network of correspondence that connected Timbuktu to the broader Islamic world, allowing knowledge and culture to flow like the Niger River itself. You ask about the rarity of manuscripts lost or damaged over time. Your dealer shrugs with a knowing smile. The desert does its best, but sand finds its way into everything. Some books have been lost to floods, fires, or simply forgotten in a dusty corner. But many survive because someone, somewhere, thought they were worth saving. Outside, the sky deepens to a velvet indigo, and the stars begin to pierce the darkness like tiny points of knowledge themselves. You realize the city doesn't just protect books, it breathes them. Before you leave, your host hands you a small, folded piece of parchment. It's a poem written by an anonymous Timbuktu scribe, dedicated to the city's manuscripts. In these pages, sands whisper. Echoes of scholars long gone. Words as vast as desert skies. Guiding minds until the dawn. You tuck the poem away, feeling a soft warmth settle over you. The quiet streets, the scent of parchment, the gentle knowledge preserved here, all invite you to linger a little longer. The dawn breaks over Timbuktu like a soft sigh, and you find yourself drawn to the city's famed manuscript restoration workshop, a quiet place tucked behind the mosque, where ancient texts are given new life. The building smells of gum arabic, beeswax, and something faintly sweet, like dried fruit left in the sun too long. Inside, a group of restorers work meticulously, each focused on a different task. One carefully cleans a fragile page with a soft brush, while another uses a heated spatula to flatten a curled corner. The work is slow, deliberate, almost reverent, as if the manuscripts were sleeping beings needing gentle care. You watch a young woman delicately apply a thin layer of paste made from plant starch to mend a tiny tear in a page. She hums softly, her voice barely audible, a lullaby passed down from her grandmother, she says, meant to soothe both the paper and the hands that touch it. Her fingers are steady, but she pauses occasionally, a small smile tugging at her lips as she imagines the hands that wrote the words long ago. Restoration in Timbuktu is not merely technical, it's an art form, intertwined with a deep respect for the past. You learn that some manuscripts were rebound multiple times over centuries, with each generation adding their own touch, whether a colorful new cover or marginal notes explaining changes in language or context. The restorers tell you about the challenges they face, the relentless desert sand, humidity that creeps in during the rainy season, and the occasional flood that threatens to wash away centuries of knowledge. One restorer recounts a near disaster when a leaking roof caused ink to run across several precious pages. The community rallied, and with a mixture of traditional techniques and modern science, they managed to salvage the texts. You notice several manuscripts sporting patches of leather or silk, repairs that tell stories of their own. One book even has a small piece of a 15th century trading caravan's cloth sewn onto its spine, a talisman against loss. Historians still argue whether Timbuktu's preservation efforts were primarily motivated by religious devotion, scholarly pride, or a simple love of storytelling. Perhaps it was all three. Nearby, an elder shows you a recipe for ink made from local plants, combining soot, water, and a secret ingredient rumored to come from acacia gum. The ink is prized for its deep black hue and lasting power. Without ink, he says, the desert would be silent. You find yourself entranced by the gentle rhythm of the workshop, the soft brush strokes, the rustling of parchment, the occasional whispered exchange about the provenance of a particular manuscript. This is a sanctuary where time slows and the voices of the past are preserved not just in words, but in the very fibers of the pages. As the sun climbs higher, you step outside, feeling the warmth on your face and the reassuring weight of a small, restored manuscript tucked safely under your arm. The knowledge of Timbuktu, fragile yet enduring, feels like a quiet beacon against the vastness of the Sahara. You walk back through the streets, carrying with you the sense that history is not just something to read, it's something to hold, to care for, and, if you're lucky, to pass on. Evening settles softly over Timbuktu, and you decide to explore one of the city's lesser-known but deeply fascinating traditions, the art of storytelling, or qasida, practiced under the stars. In a small open courtyard, the community gathers, sitting cross-legged on woven mats, eyes glowing in the firelight as an elder poet begins his recital. The stories told here are not just entertainment, they are oral archives, a living history passed down through generations. The poet's voice is steady, low, and rhythmic, weaving tales of ancient kings, heroic camel caravans, and mysterious desert spirits. As you listen, you notice the subtle humor tucked between the lines, a sly joke about a forgetful scribe, or a playful jab at a boastful merchant. One tale involves a legendary scholar who supposedly composed a poem so long that his camel had to carry extra water just for the reading. You chuckle softly, imagining the poor beast grumbling under its heavy load. The audience reacts with gentle laughter and nods of appreciation. This isn't loud or boisterous, it's a shared, quiet joy, a way to connect through memory and imagination. You realize that storytelling here is a form of relaxation and education, much like a bedtime story, helping listeners drift into a reflective calm. You learn that many stories are deeply entwined with the manuscripts you've seen. Some poems are transcribed from oral versions, others inspire written treatises on morality, law, or faith. The blending of oral and written traditions forms a unique cultural tapestry. Historians still debate how much these oral stories influenced written scholarship in Timbuktu, but what's clear is that they sustained the city's spirit during times of hardship, like droughts or political upheaval. As the night deepens, you're invited to try your hand at reciting a short poem. You stumble over the unfamiliar words but are met with encouraging smiles. Someone hands you a small drum, and you tap a simple rhythm, feeling the pulse of the desert night synchronize with your heartbeat. Before you leave, the elder offers you a final thought. In Timbuktu, stories are like the stars, they guide us when the path is dark. You tuck this gentle wisdom into your heart as the gathering slowly disperses. Walking back through the quiet streets, you feel wrapped in a comforting blanket of history, culture, and the timeless human need to share and remember. Morning arrives with the soft rustle of palm leaves and the distant call of a muezzin, pulling you toward Timbuktu's bustling caravan port on the Niger River. Here, the city's lifeblood flows not only in ink and ideas but in goods and stories carried by boats and traders from far-flung places. You watch as loaded canoes, called pirogues, glide gracefully along the muddy waters. Their crews, a mix of local fishermen and trans-Saharan traders, expertly navigate the slow current. The air smells faintly of fish, river mud, and freshly cut reeds. Goods here range from salt blocks harvested in the Sahara to kola nuts from the forested south, spices from the east, and, naturally, bundles of manuscripts carefully wrapped in cloth. You're told that the river was a crucial artery for commerce and culture alike, linking Timbuktu to the wider world. A trader offers you a sample of dried fish, a local delicacy. You try to hide your surprise when it's surprisingly pleasant, with a smoky sweetness you didn't expect. It's the river's gift, the trader says with a wink. good for keeping your energy up during those long nights of study. Nearby, women unload baskets of millet and dates, their soft chatter a background melody to the creaking boats. You notice how their movements flow like water, efficient, graceful, and practiced over generations. You learn that Timbuktu's prosperity hinged on more than just book smarts. It was a commercial hub where merchants spoke multiple languages, Arabic, Songhai, Tamashek, and negotiated deals with a smile and a firm handshake. Historians still argue how much wealth was funneled into the city from trade versus scholarly patronage. Either way, the two were inseparable: books and business, learning and logistics. You wander into a small riverside cafe, where scholars, traders, and travelers mingle over thick mint tea and small plates of peanut-studded cakes. Conversations flow from poetry to market prices, from the latest caravan routes to philosophical questions about the stars overhead. You overhear a discussion about an odd local law, that no one could trade manuscripts outside the city without official permission, a rule designed to protect Timbuktu's intellectual property long before the term existed. The idea was to prevent knowledge from becoming a commodity stripped of its cultural context. As the sun climbs, you stroll along the riverbank, feeling the warmth on your skin and the gentle splash of water against your sandals. You think about how this city, so seemingly remote, was a crossroads of ideas, goods, and people, each journey carrying a new story, a new insight, a new chapter in the ongoing narrative of Timbuktu. The river hums quietly beside you, an ever-present reminder that history flows, changes, and renews itself, just like the water underfoot. As the afternoon sun softens, you find yourself drawn toward the outskirts of Timbuktu, where the city meets the vast expanse of the Sahara Desert. Here, the sandy dunes stretch endlessly, whispering secrets carried by the hot wind, and the horizon shimmers like a mirage. You walk alongside a caravan preparing to depart. Camels are being loaded with goods, fine textiles, salt, and carefully wrapped bundles of manuscripts. The caravan leader, a weathered Tuareg man, welcomes you with a nod and shares stories of the desert's challenges, shifting sands, sudden storms, and the ever-watchful eyes of desert foxes. You learn that caravans were more than just trade expeditions, they were vital cultural exchanges. Along these routes, ideas, stories, and scholarly works traveled as readily as salt and gold. A single caravan could carry manuscripts that would later influence distant libraries in Timbuktu. Your guide points out a small leather pouch filled with dust from the Sahara, believed by some to preserve the spirit of the desert and protect travelers from harm. He offers you a pinch, a symbolic gesture of trust and blessing. Historians still debate how much control the city had over desert trade routes, especially during periods of political upheaval, but there's no question that Timbuktu's location made it a beacon for desert wanderers and scholars alike. You pause to watch a group of Tuareg women weaving intricate patterns into woven mats. Their hands move with practiced ease, creating designs that tell stories of their people's history and beliefs. The mats are both practical and symbolic, a reminder that even in the harshest environments, beauty and tradition persist. Nearby, a small fire crackles as a traveler prepares a simple meal of millet porridge, its sweet aroma mingling with the dusty air. You're invited to share in the meal, savoring the understated flavors and the warmth of companionship under the expansive sky. As night falls, the desert sky transforms into a vast tapestry of stars, each one flickering softly against the cool darkness. You lie back on a woven mat, feeling the rough texture beneath you and the gentle desert breeze on your skin. The silence is profound, broken only by the occasional call of a distant owl or the rustle of sand. It's easy to imagine the scholars and traders of centuries past resting under these same stars, dreaming of knowledge yet to be discovered. You close your eyes and let the peaceful desert night carry you away, a gentle lullaby of sand, sky, and stories whispered across time. As dawn gently unfolds its golden light over Timbuktu, you find yourself wandering toward one of the city's oldest neighborhoods, the heart of its scholarly community. Narrow alleys lead you past humble homes, each with courtyards lush with date palms and fragrant herbs. You are drawn to a modest building where the great scholar Ahmed Baba once lived and taught. Although the house is simple, it carries an air of quiet dignity, like the kind of place where ideas float as naturally as the scent of jasmine. Inside, you imagine Ahmed Baba's daily routine, rising before sunrise, reciting prayers, then settling among piles of manuscripts to study, write, and teach. He was a prolific writer, reputed to have authored hundreds of texts on theology, law, and history. The scholars in Timbuktu regarded him as a guiding light. His wisdom sought far beyond the city walls. You picture students sitting cross-legged, absorbing his words as gently as a cool breeze on a warm day. Interestingly, Ahmed Baba was once exiled by Moroccan rulers who saw his influence as a threat. Despite this, he continued to write and teach, demonstrating a resilience that echoes through the city's history. Historians still argue about the extent of his impact beyond Timbuktu, but his name remains synonymous with the city's intellectual golden age. You notice a small, worn manuscript on a low table, one of Baba's handwritten notes, its ink faded but the script elegant and flowing. A nearby scholar explains that such manuscripts often bear personal annotations, revealing the human touch behind the centuries of knowledge. You're invited to try your hand at calligraphy, gently tracing letters on soft parchment. The slow, deliberate movements relax your mind, much like a meditative practice. Outside, the streets begin to stir with the sounds of daily life, merchants opening their stalls, children laughing, and the faint rhythmic tapping of leatherworkers. You reflect on the delicate balance between preservation and change in Timbuktu, where centuries-old traditions meet the ebb and flow of everyday living. As you step back into the sunlight, you carry with you a sense of connection, not just to a place, but to the enduring spirit of learning that defines this remarkable city. The afternoon sun softens as you wander toward Timbuktu's bustling market square, a place alive with vibrant colors, the scent of spices, and the gentle murmur of bartering voices. Here, the daily rhythms of commerce pulse alongside centuries-old traditions. You meander past stalls laden with dried dates, fragrant cloves, and intricately woven baskets. Nearby, artisans demonstrate their crafts, pottery shaped with practiced hands, leather goods dyed with natural pigments, and delicate jewelry sparkling in the light. One vendor invites you to taste a traditional snack made from roasted millet and honey, a sweet, crunchy bite that feels like a tiny celebration on your tongue. You watch as a group of elderly men play a game resembling chess, their moves deliberate, their faces calm. In the midst of the market's hum, you spot a small group gathered around a storyteller, whose soft voice draws you in. He recounts tales of Timbuktu's founding, peppered with charming anecdotes about the city's colorful characters, merchants who doubled as poets, and scholars who moonlighted as musicians. You recall the manuscripts you've seen throughout your journey, each a quiet testament to the city's rich tapestry of knowledge and culture. The market, you realize, is another kind of library, one where stories, goods, and smiles are exchanged with equal value. Historians still discuss how the city's economic vitality influenced its scholarly pursuits, but here in the market, those threads seem seamlessly woven together. As evening falls, the air cools, and lanterns flicker to life, casting warm pools of light across the cobblestones. The city slows, but its heartbeat remains steady, a gentle pulse of history and life intertwined. You find a quiet corner and breathe deeply, letting the sights, sounds, and flavors of Timbuktu settle softly within you. With a smile, you think back on your journey through time, through knowledge, and through a city that, against all odds, became a beacon of learning in the vast Sahara. Now, as the night deepens and your eyelids grow heavy, it's time to rest, carrying with you the gentle whispers of Timbuktu's timeless story. As you drift toward sleep, let the soft rhythm of ancient pages turning and the quiet desert wind lull you deeper into calm. Imagine the manuscripts, safe in their bundles, resting as peacefully as you will tonight. The sun has set on this journey, but the stories will wait patiently for your return, glowing softly in the quiet night. Rest easy, knowing that history, like your breath, flows gently and endlessly. Good night.